I'm not 100% sure that I know where I want this video to go. I'm not even all that sure what my point is. I just have a lot to process and thought I'd invite you. I woke up this morning thinking about a quote that has rung very true to me over time, and more true. And the quote is, I think it's by Viktor Frankl, F-R-E-N-K-L, but you can look it up. Anyway, the first time I saw this quote, I was looking at a picture of a person sort of sitting on their knees, with their knees bent, and they sat back on their knees, and in the lap of that person was the head of someone else, laying and resting outstretched before them, and the one on their knees, their hands were on the head of the person whose head was in their lap. And the quote was, "What is to give light must endure burning. What is to give light must endure burning." And then I just switched right over to a recent experience that I had with a candlelight vigil at the I'mAlive.org training conference. At the end of the conference, we closed out with a candlelight vigil, remembering people who were important to us, who we had lost to suicide. And Reese, who's the founder of the Kristen Brooks Hope Center, got all these candles from the hotel, as many as he could find, and set them up on a beautiful table that we turned into sort of a quick makeshift altar. And he lit the first candle for Kristen, and we turned out the lights, and I lit mine for Krista, and someone else lit one for someone they knew, and then the other candles didn't get lit. And I wonder if anybody else noticed and maybe just didn't want to take up any more candles, but there weren't enough candles for everybody in the room. And then I started thinking about how many candles I would personally light for people I knew whom I'd lost to suicide, and people I knew who are survivors of other people who have committed suicide, people I'd heard of on the news who were part of the LGBT community who had committed suicide, and then other people whose reckless behaviors and lack of self-care have led to death as well. Maybe because they felt that no one cared, or any of the other reasons that we allow harm to come to ourselves. So it's kind of a heavy topic to wake up to, but whatever. Anyway, on with the story. So I was in the back of the room, and I noticed there weren't enough candles. I said, there aren't enough candles, to myself. And as I was thinking about all of these other names, I realized there aren't even enough candles for just me. And then I realized that the LGBT community, while not unique, has a much higher susceptibility to suicide. And I knew that, and we've all heard that, I'm sure. But it was very, very clear at that moment what the impact was of that fact. Where some people might have one, maybe even two candles. I think I came out with a dozen names, and I broke down, and I started shaking, and just uncontrollably, and I couldn't really control what was happening to me. So even though it was a moment of silent reflection, there was no way I was going to be silent, and rather than step out, because this was a training conference, it was important for people to realize the caliber of the issue in the community, and I was there to communicate that fact, which I did earlier that day in a lecture. So I announced, if no one else is going to, I'm going to light the rest of the candles. I gave it another second. And then I went up and I lit candles each for Henry, Chrissy, Corina, and so-and-so, so-and-so, and names. People who, many of whom are just names now. And I went back to and I was shaking so hard that I couldn't light any of the candles. In fact, I think I put out more candles than I lit. But Reese was very kind and helped me through that. And Rob and some other people just were right there with me. And, you know, these are people who are allies who made it a point to learn about our community because they want to help and they have a genuine regard for humanity itself above all else. And the stories that I've heard and the approaches from people who were in that room at the time have just been overwhelmingly beautiful, and I'm genuinely touched. One of the paradigms of suicide prevention work is like any other mental health service, and that is to enter into the pain of another person and do one's best to effect good, effect relief, effect hope. And I'm not used to being touched and not used to crying in front of people, for sure. And both of those things happened at a very, very painful time when I was at one of my most vulnerable points. Because I don't know what else could cut one to the core as deeply as suicide can. And they held me and said, this is why we're here, and this is why we do what we do. And it's interesting because there's a dynamic there that they're not just I'mAlive.org, Kristen Brooks Hope Center, 1-800-SUICIDE. They don't exist just for the sake of preventing the person who dies from committing suicide. They're trying to protect the survivors because so many of them, most if not all of them, are survivors themselves. And so it's not unique from other professions where we are affected by something in the world and we go out and try to mitigate that thing so that it doesn't happen to other people. But I'm forever changed by that moment, and it's just very interesting because we have to think about who we're connected to. You know, if we are in that dark place, who would we be leaving behind? What are the implications? You know, it opens up a whole wealth of other questions. And there are questions that I don't want to have to answer, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to do my best. Because what is to give light must endure burning, and so many candles have burned out. And I don't want that to happen. And I don't want to have to light candles. So I want to be that light and maybe somewhere in the community, you know, light a fire under other people's asses and get them started into thinking about suicide in the LGBT community and what can we do about it. Thanks for listening. Be well.